Today we're talking about metering the light. Should you not? Why would you? And how can a small little box like this be so exciting? Hey everyone, Stephan here. I hope you're doing well. Now, of course, we will talk about light metering, if and why and what, and we're talking about this brand new module from Sekonic and Godox, which finally allows us to trigger the Godox lights with the light meter. But before we go into that, I would like to say thank you. This year has been crazy. Of course, coronavirus is a big issue around the planet. My studio was shut for quite some time. There is no income. There is, financial issues and. However, on the positive side, it gave me a chance while my studio was shut down to rethink what I'm really most passionate about. And photography, of course, is, probably number two. Well, family and my kids are number one. Sorry about that. But photography is high up on the list. But the other thing that I really enjoy is teaching. I miss the workshops, the presentations, the stage. I miss working one-on-one with students. And coronavirus gave me an excuse to finally step in front of the camera and create these episodes. And it's a moment for me to say thank you. I don't make a cent from it, but I get a huge amount of pleasure receiving personal messages saying, hey, that really helped me, or that gave me this next best idea. So for those who do that, thank you very much. For those who don't, hey, I would appreciate if you leave a comment. Click that like button. We are a very, very small little group who at least watch this, or you watching this right now. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon. It means a lot to me. Anyway, let's go back to this transmitter and light meter. So there's a ton of people who say, I don't need a light meter. That's like for the old folks. Well, first of all, I am one of those. Light meters do something very different than what the camera does. A camera, you have to understand, is measuring the light that is reflected off your subject. Now, I talk about dance photography, I talk about portraiture, but it's the same everywhere. Light hits your subject, it's reflecting back into the camera, that's what the camera is measuring. Most of the time, pretty well. However, a light meter doesn't care what the subject is, it just measures the actual light that is hitting the subject. So there is no difference if you have someone with really fair light skin or someone with really dark skin. The light meter doesn't discriminate, it doesn't care. It measures the actual light hitting the subject. So there is no difference in exposure depending on who sits here. The other thing is, if I would try to match different lights with different ratios, we always hear about ratios. To make it simple, let's say I have a big key light, that should be my main light, but I have a lot of people here, like I had on Saturday and Sunday. Well, that light has a fall off, so the person here might get the full power of the strobe, while the person here might already be half a stop or a full stop under. So maybe I want to have a second light that is a lot lower powered, just to fill in that extra so I get the same exposure. This is tricky to do by eye, super simple to do with a light meter. The other reason why I use a light meter is because I rather measure than guess. Now, I often, or most of the time, set up many different lights. For the shoot on the weekend, I set up 5 different strobes. Do I use that many in one shot? No. But it allows me to switch quickly between one look and a completely different look. Let's say I'm using a massive octabank and I'm using a fill, but at the same time, I might have set up also a Magnum or sports reflector and a beauty dish and some backlights that I may or may not use. So I want to measure them all in to make sure that the exposure for each light is exactly spot on the same. So without fiddling on my camera at all, without any guesswork, I can easily switch from group A to group B, and I know I got the perfect exposure. The look completely changes, the shadows are jumping around, but my exposure is spot on. So why do I use a Lightmeter rather than guessing? Well, on the weekend we had about 100 children, all of those in multiple costumes and multiple scenes. So over 2 days, I would say if these would be individual children, we might have well photographed 800 to 1,000 kids. That means you have to get them in, photograph out, you have to be quick. There is no guessing, there is no fiddling around. You have to not only be sharp, as in focus, but you also have to be sharp, as in triggering. They come in, they do their jump, you have to nail it every single time, and they're out. And the next one comes in, does something crazy, especially those high-end dancers or near professional dancers that we photographed. They do some crazy stuff, but you have to nail it, and the light has to nail it as well. There is no guessing, there is no fiddling around. So I just want to go flash it, measure it, and see exactly what each light is doing. Now, each light has their characteristics. So in this case, this is a pretty decent size octa, I would say. I use this for a larger group. Nevertheless, it will still have a fall off towards the side. So I use a second light just as a fill-in. I'm not using a reflector, I'm using a second light, so I can guarantee that I have a total even spread of light. But sometimes I don't want that, because if it's totally even, I also lose dimension. So if I have an individual, I wouldn't go for that combination. So I need a third set of lights, something like this. I'm using a magnum reflector, or some people call it a sports reflector. I use this quite often. It's much stronger, much more contrasty. I talked about this last week. So I have this one measured in as well. Now I also know if I use this one together with this one, I'll get a totally different reading, so I have to adjust the camera settings. I make a note of this if I then want to use both at the same time. Or I'm using several other lights, be it for backlight, be it for color effect, be it for a beauty dish close for more of an interesting portrait with shadows or with a very soft skin. I measure all of them and make sure that they're all setting, like in this case on the weekend, at f8. So no guesswork. I switch between the groups, and every single time, for every single shot, I know my exposure is 100% locked in. No guesswork. This sounds brilliant, and it is. Look, I just hold it here right in my hand, bang, it talks to the Godox lights. In this case, there's a Godox light right in there. But, there is a but. Not everything works exactly how I would like. I love it, I used it, it works great, until you make changes on the Godox remote on camera itself. So, let's have a look. I've set up two strobes here, one currently set at 1/64th power, the other one is set to 1/32nd power. Then we have the Lightmeter here with the module installed to control the Godox lights, and we have the on-camera trigger. There's a Godox one and there's a Flashpoint one. This is the Flashpoint one, but the Godox one functions similar. The buttons themselves are a little bit different, and it doesn't allow, the Godox one doesn't allow to quickly double tap to switch off a group or double tap to switch on a group. On the Godox one, the buttons are here on the side. Nevertheless, functionality is the same. Generally speaking, if we go onto the Lightmeter, that's why we're here, we have the normal measuring, as we had for the whole time, that we would measure, then we would fire the strobes, and we would get the reading. This means, however, that we have to take the remote off the camera, run in front of our subject. In one hand, we hold the trigger. In the other hand, we hold the light meter, we push the button, then we trigger it from the actual module. Then once we're happy with the settings, we run back to the camera, put this onto the camera again, and then start to shoot. So it's always cumbersome. It, of course, would be much nicer if we can do everything from the light meter itself, which now we can. So if we change this from the normal strobe to the radio strobe, it will now reset the lights to whatever the light meter knew about the lights beforehand. So let's go into group B, which is this one in this case. We hit flash. The strobe settings are 1 second power. That was communicated just perfectly to the light itself. And we get a reading. Of course, the reading is super low because we're firing against a black backdrop. Now, if you would do the same with the group E, you see that this light now has been switched off. This light here, which is group E, has been enabled. I can fire at 1/16 power. We of course get a very dark reading. Now there's a third flash installed, just so that we get an actual proper reading, which is group A. If we trigger that one, we get 4.5, and that light is also at 1/4 of a power. This is brilliant, as I can go through all the different groups. I can set the light meter to fire all the strobes together. Wonderful, and we get the 8.0 that we wanted with the reflective light. That's great. Now here is what's not so great. This light meter cannot receive information, it can only send out information. And the limitation is on Godox side. It's slightly different and also looks a little bit different if you use pocket wizards or if you use other lights. Now, the problem really lies in this module, that this module does not take on the settings that this light meter has sent out. Both of the lights have received the information. As you can tell, if I go to group B, it's 1 second power. We got 1 second power here. If you go to group E, it's 1/16 power, just like we have here on the light meter. The issue, however, is on this side. This module here, or this trigger here, still believes that group B is 1/64 power, even though it is actually 1 second power. It also believes that group E is at 1/32 power, which is not. So what is happening if we now fire the camera? It's fine. We're still at 1 second power, and we're still at 1/16 power, what we measured here. That's when we fire from the camera. If, however, we use the test button, it will reset the strobes to 1/64 power and 1/32 power, which is, of course, a big issue. The only way to get away with this and actually being able to use this test button here, not to trigger the camera itself, would be to go into the menu, go down to the shooting mode and switch this to app, as if we would use the remote app. So now we can use the test button here, all the strobes fire, and the change will not apply that we had before. There's a downside to this. As great it is now, we can run around with the light meter, measure everything in. This module here will not interfere anymore. We have to keep the light meter next to us to make any changes if we want to during the shoot. So instead of using the dial here, we have to now do it on the light meter because the dial itself is switched off in app mode. So the only way to get the dials back is to change this again, and it believes it's 1/64 power. Now, if you don't ever use that button here, you're fine. If you don't change any settings on the trigger on camera, you're fine. If, however, you work like I do, this creates a problem. because I very often use these buttons here. That's the reason why I use the flash point trigger and not the Godox trigger. I very often enable a group, disable a group, fire them, make sure that they're not asleep, because those triggers or those lights sometimes go to sleep too quickly. So I very often change which lights are on, which lights are off, to create different looks without running to the lights at all. That is something that interferes with the measuring. So the way I do it at the moment, I love the fact that I can trigger flashes that are difficult to reach. And I will trigger them and change them only on the Lightmeter. Everything else, I'm sad to say, at the moment, I still have to go to the original setting. I have to go to the camera, take this off, run with the trigger and the Lightmeter in front of the subject and measure it the old-fashioned way. That's just the honest way how this works. It's a one-way communication from the Lightmeter to the strobes, which is great, which is brilliant. If you're out and about and you have a strobe somewhere up in a tree, you can change all the settings on your Lightmeter, great. Then you just fire from the camera without changing anything up here and you are good to go. Great system. If you use the different groups and make adjustments on camera with that remote, it's not for you, or maybe not yet for you. Well, there you go. I hope that was a little bit helpful. If you use a Lightmeter or not, at the end of the day, all that matters is the quality of your photo and the outcome and the fun producing it anyway. And if you're thinking about getting the module for the Lightmeter, it's definitely a great help, but I hope I was also open enough and honest enough to show you what doesn't work, or maybe doesn't quite work yet. Anyway, that's it for me for this week. I hope to see you again next week, and don't forget, subscribe, click that little bell icon, send me a message, leave a comment. It's always greatly appreciated. All right, look after yourself and create something awesome.